Mic's still working, yeah. I'd like to talk to you about why we strive to be normal in our society. I'd like to start by an example. So there I was in year 11, receiving our brand new maths result in our new progress test, which to be fair, we only had about 2 lessons on. And I come across there's something interesting that happened in our class that I've noticed over countless years, but never really thought why. So the first thing that happens when everybody got their tests result was people started to say, what did you get? What was your mark? What percentage did you get? What was question 7? Was it 49? And me too, I also asked about that question and nobody got it right. But it's not about the result that mattered here for me. It was something different, something that I actually want to talk to you today is that we weren't actually measuring our success individually as much as we wanted to measure our success amongst the rest of the class. We wanted to see how we were doing compared to our friends, our peers. And I'd like to say the smartest person in our class who achieved 96% wasn't particularly praised and not particularly said, oh, you're so amazing, I wish, well, yes, they wish that they could be like them, but they weren't particularly praised and said how amazing they were. Rather, they received kind of a 96%, oh, I could never get that, oh, you work way too hard, I would never do that. But the thing about that example is that despite the percentages, despite the grade that you got, people were measuring themselves up to each other. People wanted to be like everyone else. People wanted to equal each other, and that made them feel satisfied. That made them want to feel like they were like everybody else. And we can observe this phenomenon in different things, like, for example, fashion choices, how people choose their music, as we've just seen. This phenomenon can be observed here. Now we're going to talk about different concepts. So uniqueness. In a different way, we could talk about how the society, everybody is different. Everybody has different skills, different passions, and where they come from. You could be from Britain, you could be from Mexico, you could be from Japan, play the guitar, have 4 siblings, be an archaeologist. It's pretty obvious, but I'd like to talk to you about, wait, one sec, before that. It's always a weird slide, isn't it? So what I'm trying to say is that in these examples, that people had different interests, and we need to look at how people view normality, and people should always see as, oh, just following the crowd, being like everybody else. But is it really that bad? And is it really something that we should be ashamed of? Oh yeah. So let's have an example. You're going to university for the first time, and you have an interview. Depending on the situation, you'll probably adapt to fit into the exact situation that you're in. So in this case, asked what you like to do, I'll probably not say how I love watching YouTube videos for hours on end, and probably focus more on that one time I went to volunteer, which I'll say how amazing of a person I've become after that experience. To continue, I'd like to talk about the fundamentals. So if we go way back to where there was no Twitter, no toilet paper, not very nice, but if we go back thousands upon thousands of years before society was as it is today, we can begin to understand that fitting in then didn't really mean to if you don't fit into society back then, it didn't really mean you could just complain about it on Twitter and just be like, oh, society is just, oh, so horrible, I couldn't fit in today, it was rubbish. Well, back then, you'd probably die. Because not fitting in didn't really mean that you could just go back to the same life you've lived. Not fitting in meant that you couldn't join the tribe, you couldn't help, you couldn't contribute, and in that way, you could not survive, because back in the fundamental parts of our society, back thousands of years ago, that was the primary concern. Not to get our newest iPhone, it was to live, to find a boar, maybe kill it, share it with the family. And yes, if we continue, we had to work together to fit into our society, to ultimately have the goal of two things, to survive and to reproduce. And if you survive, you could reproduce and continue a society. But the difference today, as we see, is that those issues are no longer too much of a concern. Actually, we face the opposite, overpopulation. So if we continue to a real-world example, back then, the enemies would probably be like the tiger who'd probably want to eat you, or competitors. But in this day, we kind of created our own enemies by, for example, it could have been your neighbor, Carl, who also is running that 5K, wants to win gold, and you do as well. So in this case, there's a sort of competition. This world is defined by this competition, the individual, the success of the individual. What's interesting to note here is that, as you can see, the winner is obviously Bolt, as it was 4 times, actually no, 3 times. Not important information. So that's what the whole world, the success is defined as. If you are successful yourself, then you will continue and become successful. You don't necessarily need to fit in order to succeed in the modern world that we live in. So let's bring another example. So there are burger stands, and if you are the CEO, you'd probably want your burger stand to succeed. And by that, you don't want to fit into the other burgers and be a cool burger stand. You'd want to be different in the market of burger stands, where in fact you'd want to have the best burgers, the tastiest ones, the best location, the best branding, marketing, etc. By doing that, they're working on them individually, and they don't want to fit in completely. So if we move on to the social influence and peer pressure, I'd like to talk about how it's much different in that way, because, similarly to fitting into our social group is very important, because acceptance in our peer group is extremely vital to a lot of us. And as we see today, the first day of school, how probably all of you have experienced this before, that your primary objective is to, fit in, get to know everyone, and primarily to withstand social connection with them throughout the year, maybe even your whole life. And this worry comes down to different parts. Well, peer pressure is a different thing, where you could be influenced in a bad way to make poor decisions. But this really brings it down to how important and how strong those instincts are as human beings, how we so need and want to be like everybody else. A dark example will probably be how somebody could be influenced in a poor way to do things that they would normally not do themselves. Things that, for example, a new person at school wants to be accepted into this cool clique, cool group of friends, like, I don't know, maybe you've seen the movie The Mean Girls, without the "the." And basically, what's understood is that despite the moral standings, despite how the person wants to behave like they are, despite what their parents and society have told them to not do at a young age, this person actually accepted, and despite the risks, they were choosing to do so, even with all the challenges that they had ahead, the problems that they might face in the future. Instead, because of the need to, they felt the need to be accepted, to be part of this group, they ultimately caused not a very good part on themselves, because this may lead to not very good outcomes. So this just tells you how big people actually want to fit in, especially the young minds can be influenced so easily. So another I want to talk about example is, what about a very high-ranked school, for example. So you've just got into that school, and you notice that everybody is just so much smarter, so much more prepared and motivated to be successful. So you do a progress test, and you find that you get a B. It's not that bad in the first time, but you look around your class and you see people get A's, A stars, some people getting full marks, and you'll probably be more inclined to actually want to work harder and be like the rest of the class, because you ultimately don't want to fall back. And comparing this to like a different, maybe a lower performing school, you'd probably getting the same B in the same test would lead to a different outcome for you, how you'd prefer to continue. So given that you got a B, maybe a few people got a B and the rest got C's and D's, you probably feel a much higher sense of satisfaction in your result. Oh, I got the top percentage in the class, I'm doing great. But you see there that you compare yourself differently in both examples, and overall you, despite having the same grade, it's much different. Now let's look at another thing. So a couple years back, I had an EAL teacher who, a long time ago, went to Greece, from England to Greece, and she told us about how the life was just so much different, and the teaching styles and mannerisms, characteristics in class, how they would be taught was different. So initially, her initial style of teach, like more of a British classic teaching style, it kind of didn't really connect with the class. And she started to notice that other teachers were kind of doing a different thing. They were behaving differently, explaining things in a different manner, different intonation. So the fact that her surroundings, she committed a socially tried to change in order to be successful as a teacher. But not only that, not only changing her mannerisms to suit the class, she also told us how she underwent a lot of changes in terms of character, because the things around her, because she subconsciously changed, she became the change subconsciously over the time, because it's something that she didn't control, something that rather came to her, something that a habit has been built up, years of being in the same city, country. So yeah, and obviously the physical changes, probably the difference in food, would heavily impact on how she would be differently, how she'd be a different person. And obviously these changes were observed and seen when she came back to England. So another thing I'd like to say to conclude is that we need to understand that in today's world, yes, competitiveness plays a major part, but we also cannot deny our fundamental instincts of what makes us humans, of what we use to survive over thousands upon thousands of years to be alive today. These instincts of fitting in and being part of a society. Because with that information, we can understand better, we can understand peer pressure and its causes better. And ultimately, because of this, we can control these different aspects. Instead of trying to tell us, no, you need to fit in, no, you need to be different, we need to understand and control these two, because sometimes you need to fit in order to stand out. Thank you.